All right, welcome everybody to it's this afternoon for us. I don't, it's possible, I guess some of you are in another time zone, but welcome to our NCAA's Division III Athletic Direct Report webinar. We're going to be talking about managing risk in athletics for athletic direct reports today, which feels a really important topic. My name is Sarah Fireham. I'm the Vice President for Student Affairs at Washington College, as well as the Athletic Direct Report. And I am joined by my colleague Eva Chatterjee Sutton from Washington and Jefferson College, where she is also a VP for Student Affairs. Might have a slightly different title, and I'll let her completely introduce herself later. As well as Eric Hartung from the NCAA, who's going to give us an update after Eva's and my presentation about managing risk in athletics. As we go into the webinar, just a couple of reminders. The Q&A is available and open. So if you have questions during the presentation that you would like to have us answer, Bryn from the NCAA is going to be monitoring that. And so we will be able to answer those questions all the way up through the end of the webinar, which is slated to go for 1 hour. So we will now, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and go through the agenda for this afternoon. So we're going to start off with our introductions, talk about risk management as a strategy. Specifically, we want to talk about student athlete health and safety risks, facility risks, NCAA compliance risks. Sorry, you can go back. Yeah. And then I'm going to leave you with a checklist, a takeaway checklist, and then Eric will give you the Division III analysis update. So just to kick off, as I mentioned, I am the VP for Student Affairs at Washington College. We're in the Centennial Conference. I am the Athletic Direct Report and have been in that position for almost 10 years now. And it continues to be the favorite part of my job. Don't tell anybody else in student affairs here, but I love that part, love working with our athletic director and our president on creating a really wonderful Division III experience for our student athletes. And I'll hand it over to Eva to introduce herself.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Eva Chatterjee Sutton. I'm the Vice President for Student Life and Dean of Students at Washington and Jefferson College, which is about 30 minutes south of Pittsburgh. We are a heavily athletic campus. We have 28 sports, and about 45% of our students are student athletes. I love working in the athletic space, and I particularly feel privileged to work with the ADR Institute along with Sarah and Louise, but also to continue the professional development for ADRs and the work that we do to support our student athletes, our ADs, our presidents, and our conferences. I am in the President's Athletic Conference and excited to spend the next hour or so with you, kind of as a continuation of professional development that we offer typically at convention. And we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of our time together.
Thanks, Eva. And Eric, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. My name is Eric Hartung. I'm the Director of Division III here at the National Office in Indianapolis. Some of you, I recognize a few names, and you may recognize me. I'm in my 24th year at the NCAA, having served in a few different roles along the way, but always have had a very, very close tie with Division III, and have been a full-time Division III staffer for a number of years now in the governance department. And I'm going to help us out at that very last bullet. I'm going to spend a few minutes speaking about the NCAA Division III analysis.
Great. Thanks, Eric. So we'll go ahead and dive into, first of all, the topic of today. And even I want to talk a little bit why we thought this was sort of an appropriate topic for today. We decided to call it risk management as a strategy. Sometimes risk management, despite its phrasing, becomes something that we do only when we've actually encountered the risk, and maybe sometimes when it's too late. And so we as ADRs have this responsibility for strategy in a lot of areas that we oversee. And in athletics, it's incumbent on us to be able to see strategy and see ahead. Because sometimes, as we know, the athletic director doesn't always have time to see that. The analogy that I use is if you've ever driven in a car at night in a snowstorm, sometimes I think that's what our athletic directors feel like they're doing. They are trying to keep the bus or the car on the road between the lines. You really don't have the opportunity to look past just the things that are coming at you and fending them off and dealing with them. We have the luxury of probably not even being in that car, but maybe sitting back at home watching the AD drive the car in the snowstorm and being able to look ahead and say, what are the risks coming up? We have a little bit more of often we will have a little bit more of a mindset around that. We're used to thinking about risk in so many areas, whether you're a student affairs person or your enrollment or you're in academics or any other area. So we think it's sort of a unique position for us to be in, and we wanted to do this presentation to really leverage those strategy skills that we know ADRs already have and really attach them to athletics. Eva, I'd like to hand it over to you to comment.
Sure. So I echo everything Sarah said. And one of the goals for us today is to give you some tangible examples of how we're applying what we're talking about to work that we're doing on our campus. And for me, the best way to do that is to talk a little bit about adding to sports, which we've done, and we'll start competition next fall. So we had created an athletic strategic plan about 2.5 years ago with a large committee dedicated to thinking about the next 3 to 5 years in athletics at W&J. And I would say that it was a reluctant effort at first. I think the kind of devoting the time to looking at data and projecting when it felt like sometimes we needed to be reactive to either enrollment needs or what was happening or budget kind of challenges. Hands down, I would say that if our athletic director was on this call, he would tell you that that was a very wise decision and investment of time because it allowed us to chart a path forward in a number of areas. And one of those was adding 2 sports, men's volleyball and women's wrestling. The risk portion of that is obviously they're all the imagined risks you have with starting something new, attracting the right talent, recruiting the students, getting, competition from your conference or outside of the conference, depending on whether your sport's offered there. We're now at the phase where we are moving towards implementation. So we recruited a group of students last year. They're not in competition until next year. We're at the point where we're starting to think about the risks of compressed practice time for other teams that need the same kind of space. We carved out budgets. We had done all of the forward thinking things that we needed to do that were completely like crystal clear that you would think about. But this, and I'm hearing this echoing refrain from other coaches who are saying, I don't want my team practicing till 11 o'clock at night. Where are we going to put these extra sports in terms of practice? What about fleet use, and how are we going to get people here and there and make accommodations for those things? And so fortunately we had kind of this had coincided with a renovation of our locker rooms, so we were able to tackle that. But the risk piece of it continues to challenge us. So sports information as a resource, athletic training as a resource, and senior department gets stretched a little bit thinner than people are ready for. Just things that we need to think about. And while my AD is on the ground, it's kind of me navigating on behalf of the institution and helping point him in the right direction for the kind of resource support that is needed for now and for 2 years from now when we're actually in competition in a different way.
Great, thanks, Eva. One of the things on this slide we mention is that it's sort of assessing where your athletic director is on strategy and on being able to look ahead and where are your strengths in that area and where can you fill in. And that's really what a lot of this is about. For some of you, your athletic director may be totally on top of some of these risks, but not so on other things. And maybe they're just, again, maybe they're just a really good manager and they're really good at dealing with crisis when it comes, but maybe not so good at looking ahead. So again, we've sort of divided up risks into some categories that we think are probably helpful, and we'll go ahead and start going through those. And we're going to start with health and safety risks. I always like to start here because it's one of those primary values that we have, is that our student athletes are healthy and safe, right? This is kind of in many ways a high risk operation. We've got student athletes going out there and in some cases hitting each other in the contact sports, engaging in really intense competition, and really training their bodies in many ways for some really to their limits. So the risks are many, and we have to make sure we're thinking about all of those. So all the areas include things like how we're injury treatment and prevention. So assessing your athletic training, assessing whether you have enough athletic trainers per individual, as well as whether you have the degree to which you are doing sports performance and you have professionals who can do that, right? So when I was coaching here at Washington College, we did not have a sports performance professional. I had to learn myself what's the best way to physically train a field hockey player. And now many of us are, if you're lucky enough, you've got someone in sports performance. But that adds a benefit, but with every benefit, there are obviously also some risks as well. And some of that, when you think about athletic training and sports performance, some of that is one-on-one interaction between athletes and athletic trainers. So there's always some things you need to make sure that you're there appropriately. Everything from background check to that we have some systems and protocols in place. So any sort of concerns about the behavior or treatment they're getting from an athletic trainer or a sports performance professional can be managed and dealt with quickly. The thing that I've noticed is a big risk is that collaboration between athletic trainers and your health service folks. Ultimately, your health services have the institution in mind. Hopefully, your athletic trainer, whoever your chief medical officer is at the college, sort of really has that expressed responsibility to make sure that the student athlete health is first and foremost, not their importance to whether they can play in that game and whether the team needs them to win or not. And so those are the things that we're making sure that communication works well. Maybe they're using the same electronic medical record system. If they're not, how do they do that? The place that the athletic trainer and the health services really have to work closely, especially is on concussions and the return to play protocols. So just another aspect there. The next bullet point is really about team culture issues, and these are the types of things you've probably seen this when they pop up, and you see them in media outlets. There's always people saying, "I had no idea this was happening," and that actually can happen, right? Coaches can miss some things. Athletic directors certainly can, and as an ADR, you are not usually privy to seeing those things, but you still have a responsibility to make sure you're taking steps to minimize the risk, whether it's in training around bullying and hazing and Title IX. I think there are additional risks around mixed gender teams. For instance, we have a sailing team, we have a trap and skeet team, both varsity, that are co-ed, so they travel together. They have overnight, you've got the accommodation issue, you've got things that, and I'm not saying that by having a co-ed team, you're going to have an issue, but there is that potential that you need to figure out and think about. And I would even ask the AD, what are the rooming options? If you've got a head coach, let's say you only have a coach and maybe you're lucky enough to have a trainer who is of one gender, how do you support the other gender if something happens during a trip? So just things to sort of consider and to keep in mind. And I mentioned also sort of the coaching risks. We all have done the things around background checks, obviously. But we know that coaching is um, and athletics is a very intense situation. And sometimes that results in conflict. Sometimes that results in romantic entanglements. Sometimes it just results in, I would say, sort of low level butting of heads. So it's an environment that is sort of that can be can potential things can potentially happen. So it's really and for me it's really more about checking in with the athletic director and saying, how are these teams going? What are you seeing? Are you hearing anything from athletes? I still try and go to an occasional practice. In addition to going to games, you see a lot more in practice than you do in games. Um, I mentioned travel before as just a place where a lot of things can happen. I mean, ensuring that you've got travel procedures. Do you, every time one of your teams goes away, is there, I'm assuming that most of you have this, but it's always good to check, a place where there's a list of all those students who are traveling, if they're on different buses, who's on what, where they're going. We house all that information in our public safety office. But those are the kinds of things you don't want to be caught without that information if something bad happens. Um, so processes for reporting concerns. If you're in the state of Maryland, there's actually a requirement that somebody outside of the athletic department is designated as a sort of an ombudsman who can take complaints. And then, social media harassment, I don't think it happens as much on the Division III level, but it happens interpersonally. So these are things that also can be significant risks. And I'm going to pass it back over to Eva because she's got some additional thoughts on this.
Thanks, Sarah. I think so. A couple points I want to emphasize because I think Sarah gave you a really fulsome overview. I think when you're thinking about the team culture issue and coaching risks and the kinds of things that can come up in a space where it's pretty dynamic and there are lots of, these are highly competitive teams internally as well as colleagues and peers. But trying to think about how you position the opportunity proactively. So one of the things we've talked about is surveys at the end of each season that just routinely go out to student athletes, and maybe even having SAC have a role in that, where they get to provide real-time feedback on their experience, and to let you know, and maybe the FAR and the AD, whether it's anonymized or not, just kind of how people are experiencing their season and the dynamic within the team. I love the idea of being on site for a practice. I also try to meet with each team at the beginning of their season and let them know they're going to see me, they're going to hear from me, and that I'm a resource to them if they want to let me know about anything that's going on, good, bad, or indifferent. But I think to the extent that you have avenues for students to report, that's a really good thing. One kind of case example that I'll share with you that happened this semester, and it goes in the vein of things that you wouldn't expect until they happen. But we had a situation where uh, a, a student athlete who was in a relationship with someone not from our campus, and ended that relationship. A couple months later, she contacted the college making claims about this student and contacted the coach, me, the athletic director, and then in kind of unraveling it, it became very complicated. One of the challenges was from a coaching risk standpoint, this was a coach who was not very comfortable with this topic and ended up kind of sharing the information with the team before we had a chance to work through some of the elements of it. So I think about coaching risk sometimes in the preparedness of your coach to handle the kinds of situations that might feel really uncomfortable for them or hit them just kind of blindsided, and where they think that they're doing the right thing by the student or the team, but they may be creating a bigger risk. And instead of taking the time to consult with the AD or someone else, was quick to try to nip this in the bud and instead made it kind of a bigger problem than it needed to be. I think it also goes back to the culture issue. So my question when something like that happens is not just always dealing with the situation that's happened, but then thinking about the aftermath and how is that team coming together, processing and working through a situation that's impacted the team in some way. And I think the other piece that is always kind of hovering over us is parent involvement when we're thinking about health and safety. And so in some cases, you have parents that are near your campus that can be on site when a student has an injury or has a situation that's come up. In some cases, you're communicating with that parent, and so the coach is obviously instrumental because of the relationships they have. But thinking critically about what kinds of communication do you want to have in situations of that nature, and who's going to take lead on that and manage those situations to make sure that the parents are looped in at the right time. Is there
Great.
anything you want to add?
No, thank you. And I apologize, Eva, because I know you were going to take lead on that one, and I
Okay.
already messed it up. Do you want to do you want to take the next slide, or do
Yeah,
you want me
that's
to?
fine. I'll
Okay,
take the next slide.
great. We'll
Sure.
rotate then. Okay.
Yep. So we're ready, Bryn, to move on. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about facility and equipment risks from the strategic standpoint and risk standpoint. One of the things that if you don't have in place that we highly suggest that you consider is what your emergency action plan is. You likely have one for the college in certain scenarios or situations that could come up. And it's advisable that you also consider a very specific plan for athletics. The kinds of interactions you're having, as you know, in athletics are quite different than, a classroom situation or some other things that could happen on your campus. And so thinking about an emergency action plan in terms of a chain of command of who's going to take point in situations, where does communication live? And is it, all of us, I think, have SIDs, but you've also probably got a communications office on your campus or staff that's going to want to be looped in whenever you're taking action to mitigate any kind of social media issues that may come up, any kind of press issues that may come up, and to be an extra set of hands as things might evolve and unfold, especially with the larger community. That said, I think spending some good time with an athletic director, your director of campus safety or police or whatever agency you have on your campus that is conducting the safety protocols. If you're a residential campus, I think great to have your director of residence life in there, someone from the business office that's thinking about risk, but to really develop that action plan and make sure it's a plan that people are well versed in. So to that end, I would suggest, if you don't already, to do a tabletop exercise on a regular cadence. We tend to do them once every semester, not just with our emergency response team for the college, but to do one that's specific to athletics. And it helps you kind of flex that muscle when it comes to how are you going to react in a situation. That said, there's always a nuance that's a little bit different. And so given the kind of connection you likely have with your athletic director, when you have time in your regular meetings, it's always great to review what's going on and to think about what would we do differently or how should we change our plan, if at all. Although we hope it will never happen, having a good plan in place for an evacuation of every facility you have is really advisable. We have weather monitoring on here, which is absolutely critical, especially as weather gets more volatile in all of our areas and can impact things like travel, but also your facility. If there's a power outage, if there's some kind of breach to your facility that requires some action, making sure that proactively you're securing everything with the help of your facility staff and your campus safety or whoever's doing the weather monitoring to avoid additional damage where it's possible, but to make sure that if there are people in a space that you have a clear developed evacuation plan. I always suggest that it's posted in your kind of facility. So the kind of you are here map that makes sure people know where exit doors are located, and certainly for the staff that you have on site to be well versed in those situations should they happen, where they can take lead in directing people at that time. And being clear, going back to your emergency action plan of who's going to make that call when it happens, and that you have a clear, decisive approach to that. In terms of the sport specific, obviously having the right gear becomes really important, and making sure that gear is tested and in good working conditions at all times. And so that's field maintenance, that's the kind of backdrops and nets that you have. It's thinking about the quality of your turf and the spaces that students are going to be in, and making sure that there aren't any additional hazards that could have been in the place. And that's kind of the proactive maintenance that you have in place, and making sure that someone's tasked with that on a regular basis. We talked a little bit about travel when we talked about risk before, but thinking about what's the shape of your vehicles that you're using? Are they maintained regularly? We had a situation where a vehicle broke down a couple years ago, and having a plan in place for the people who are traveling to know, like, who do you call first? Where's the insurance information? How do you get a rental car in that situation? When do you tell the college so that we can help you on site? All of those things kind of go back to your emergency action plan. And then thinking about, I talked about signage in terms of emergency, but I would encourage you all over the summer, if you haven't already, to do a really deep signage audit of your facilities. That is a place where you have guests and visitors coming on a regular basis. Obviously, you have the other team there, making sure they have wayfinding that's clear, they can find all the amenities that they need, and they also know how to access help. So whether that's calling your campus safety, getting in touch with someone in the athletic department, that it's clear and very visible. So Sarah, anything that you'd want to add or to share an example here?
Yeah, I think as at some point when you think about all the traveling that is being done by your teams, if you've got a pretty big athletic department, at some point there's going to be something's going to happen, right? And it's as small as just running late too. A couple of years ago, we had the bus carrying our women's soccer team caught on fire. And thank God they all got out. Luckily, and somebody was smart enough to remind them not to try and grab all their stuff, but just to get out of the bus on time. But luckily, we had a good system in place. Our coach had a checklist, who to call. We had a list of all the students who were on the bus, contacted the parents, said they're okay. And in this day and age, by the time you're contacting the parents, they already know because their kid has called them or texted them, or somehow word has traveled. So really just being prepared to do things quickly is one of the things we have learned, and making sure that your coaches, assistant coaches have all the information they need and a pretty simple checklist to follow if something happens. Because as we all know, if something happens that's it can be pretty traumatic, you lose sort of all sense of like, what am I supposed to do? And that's where a checklist, just having it right in front of you, comes in really handy. You can kind of fall back on that. So, those are the kinds of things that when you think about risk, like likely there's going to be some issue at some point. If you've got teams that are traveling abroad right now, I know we're thinking a lot about that and our students, and about what is your system for determining whether your students can travel abroad. And you may already have something like that in place. So all things to consider in athletics. And I think I find we all know that things like gyms, weight rooms, and athletic fields are attractive nuisances. So you're always going to find, whether it's local kids or somebody from the community wanting to use those spaces. So you've got to think about, how you secure them, and how you make sure that nobody's going to be put at risk if they wander onto these facilities. All right, so we will go ahead and we'll move to our next slide and our next risk area, which is really about the NCAA and other compliance risks. And I think a lot of just in general compliance risks is probably something most of you are really familiar with. The specific things that are applicable to athletic teams are a little bit more. You may not have as much familiarity with them. You don't have to know everything. What you do need to know is who is the compliance officer for the athletic team, for the athletic department, and making sure that they are properly trained, that they've through the NCAA education, and that they are on top of things. Because sometimes what you don't want is your athletic director just appointing somebody saying, okay, now you're going to be the compliance director. A good compliance officer in your athletic department is worth their weight in salt. It is, you want to make sure that that person's really on top of things. There's all sorts of forms. There's a kabillion of them, and I'm not even going to go through all of these. And then you may have your own institutional health forms, your baseline concussion testing. For NCAA, there are yearly forms for Title IX education, as well as sexual violence attestation that student athletes have to sign, and you have to attest that you've done certain things. There's things like, the payment of dues schedule. There's the EADA report, and as well as sort of ongoing compliance around Title IX. I think we've all gotten so used to Title IX being about sexual harassment and discrimination and sexual violence that sometimes we forget that we have athletic departments that have to comply with Title IX in other ways. So whether it's your participation ratios, whether it's the benefits that your male and female athletes are getting, or other opportunities, you've got to keep an eye on that. And someone has to be doing that. And I would say that's one that I have seen sort of fall off to the wayside, especially since 2011, when Title IX compliance became much more about sexual assault and sexual harassment. Eva mentioned before about risks around adding and dropping sports. We all know it's hard to know what's going to happen, especially if you drop a sport. We've seen some really bad things happen with especially alumni and donors. But thinking those things through about the risks and benefits of both of those, adding and dropping, are always ones that you want to work through really carefully. There's a financial aid reporting from Division 3, which is really foundational. And I'm sure Eric could answer any questions you have on this, because he's been very involved in this. But yearly you're reporting your financial aid to the NCAA to ensure that your institution is not over awarding students who happen to be athletes. So this is a really important one. I think it's important that you stay in touch with the athletic director and your director of financial aid long before the report is submitted, and that you have the kind of relationship with a director of financial aid who's going to tell you maybe, a month or so beforehand, like, this may not be looking right. Then all of a sudden it gets submitted to the NCAA and you get notified that they've got to talk to you a little bit more. So it's not something that you or your president wants to be caught off guard in. So, Eva or Eric, do you have any thing you'd like to add about those topics?
I could just add something real quick about the financial aid reporting. We do an educational module on financial aid reporting that we would have available to any institution that wanted to take part in that. You can bring together the key individuals in athletics and in financial aid and enrollment management and admissions to engage on this, including yourselves as ADRs. The point that Sarah made, though, is foundational here when she talked about you should be having these discussions before. What we preach as fervently as we can is that communication is key in this area, as well as all these other areas too, but especially when it comes to NCAA compliance with Bylaw 15.
And I'll just give the NCAA, Eric and his colleagues, a nod. They have been very helpful to us when we've had some questions about how to submit something, whether we did it right, whether something like they've been very responsive and helpful to us. Eva, do you have anything else to add?
I don't think on this, but maybe on the next slide, the checklist.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll move on to that.
All right.
Great, thanks. So just kind of, hopefully this wraps up Sarah and my portion of thinking comprehensively about the risks. We wanted to leave you with something tangible that you could take away in terms of thinking about your own program and your work on campus. We just talked about the NCAA compliance, but really knowing what the deadlines are so you can be mindful of that. And I know for me, reading that EDAD report is super helpful in thinking about our not just our gender compliance, but our compliance around finances, what the balance is in terms of cost per sport, when we're thinking critically about allocation of resources and other opportunities to grow the experience of students. That report has so much information in it that is really useful. If you have not looked at it before, I encourage you to do it and do it with your AD, who can walk you through like the just immense amount of data that's there to figure out what's most important for you. But ultimately, as Sarah was talking about, really from, there's the compliance piece of it that we have to do. And then there's the qualitative compliance piece of it, which I'd say from our seats as strategic leaders in athletics that we have to sometimes really remind the team that's on the ground of, are we providing an equitable and positive experience to every student athlete that we recruit to be part of our team and representing our colleges? And I think that the vein of this checklist really speaks to that. Really looking at your emergency action plan for your athletics department, which we talked about earlier, and reviewing that on a regular basis, and using your time with your AD to really think about risk management. So I don't think, unless you're reacting to something or something's come up, it needs to be a every meeting type of thing. I meet with my AD once a week, but really devoting some time that's calculated to talking through risk management. And I'll take it a couple steps further. Just yesterday, ironically, I had my meeting with the FAR and the AD. We meet once every other month to talk about issues that bleed in terms of athletics and academics. But also, we have a faculty rep program, and so talking about that. And once a semester, the FAR, the president, and I meet, and that's really a strategic meeting. And so we were preparing the agenda for that meeting yesterday, and I try to make sure risk management is part of that, to make sure my president is, on her horizon are the things that we're thinking about that queue up other conversations about budget that we're going to have, or decisions that we need to make. One of the other meetings we do on campus, which may be helpful to mention here, is we have a meeting of our chief development officer, our VP for development and alumni, our chief financial officer, myself, the athletic director, and the president. And that happens once a month. And that allows us to really think about where can we align resource development among the recruiting strategy. Where do we need to head off a conversation that might be going off the rails, where someone externally is thinking about risk or an alum is thinking about risk? And we're all kind of in the same space to have those conversations together. They are on a very strategic level, but they have proven to be extremely helpful. And it's a great way to talk about facilities management, resources, and time capital decisions to things in athletics that may be decisions we need to make now, but maybe a decision that we're queuing up from a year from now. So to the extent that's helpful, I wanted to mention that. Coming back to the athletic department, I think ensuring your policies are reviewed on a regular basis and that they're known. So they should be known to your staff, absolutely. Think about the students, whether it's captains, whether it's SAC, whether it's student employees in athletics, that need to know what those policies are and how they're connected with your institutional policies. So when Sarah talked about compliance officers within athletics, my hope is that your compliance officer in athletics is also connected to your compliance officer across the college, if they're not one and the same person, and that they're working really in concert to make sure that everything is aligned and consistent and congruent. Really thinking about when you're having yearly reviews, looking at student athlete surveys, the experience, likely you're doing performance reviews, and how do those issues show up in opportunities to evaluate your staff so that you're in a continual improvement mindset. And also taking the time for you to be present and around the facilities to use your own knowledge and experience to assess what's happening, where improvements can be made, having casual conversations with staff and students and visitors to the campus that can give you insight into what's working or what's not. Oftentimes there's an issue, and I love that Sarah mentioned guests to the campus that you haven't necessarily invited in that want to use your facilities because they feel like they're public or they're available to them, and being mindful of when is that appropriate and when it's not. And if you need to put some measures in place to make sure you're mitigating risk around those kinds of experiences. It's important that you do that. So finding time to do that, I think doing it with your AD or coach or your SWA, but making sure you have that visibility to walk around and see what is happening. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, the walk around is really about sort of fresh set of eyes and making sure, because sometimes I like, I'll give you an example. It's not really a risk issue, but it's an example. Every year, we walk into our fitness center, there's a clock there, and the clock is up pretty high. And this has happened the last two time changes. There's been like months after the time change, and I've been walking around with Thad, our athletic director. I'm like, Thad, the time is wrong still. And he's like, oh, I pass it every day. I never notice it, right? Just an example. And plus, he's tall enough that he can actually reach up and do it. But there are things like that will, and again, that's not the best example of something that's like unsafe, but there are things that they don't see anymore, that it's really good. I like doing the walk around. We'll sometimes do it with our faculty athletic rep, who's got like a total fresh set of eyes. She was a swimmer in college, but we walk around the baseball field, the softball field, and she'll ask a question about like, what is that? And what's the batting cage? And looking at the dugouts, and we can talk about, what are the safety issues there. So it's really about a fresh set of eyes and making sure that you're always that you're always thinking forward. So, this is far from being an exhaustive checklist. We just thought these were some of the key things. If you walk away from this with just sort of some key things that you want to make sure you're doing, we're hoping that would be useful to you. And before I hand it over to Eric, I do want to remind you, I forgot to tell you at the beginning that because this is being recorded, and it will be posted on the Division III and the NCAA's Division III webinar page. So if you want access to it later, or somebody who wants access to it, it will be available after the webinar.
And Sarah, can I just add one plug before we move
Oh,
on
yes,
to Eric?
please do.
I want to encourage you to consider, if you have not attended the ADR Institute at convention, it is, I think, time well spent. It's a great 2 days of professional development with colleagues like yourself that athletics reports to, and we typically have 2 tracks. If athletics is new to you, in your portfolio, if you've not attended an institute before, we have a more comprehensive piece of it. And then if you have attended, or if you've had more experience, we have I would say a part 2 where you join the group and add your perspective, but also we get to work through some case studies and talk about some of the things that we manage and deal with in our seats. So I hope you'll consider that opportunity. And if you've attended before and it's been useful to you, I hope you'll encourage a colleague to go as well. So
Great.
with that, we'll turn it over to Eric.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Eva. I really appreciate that. And I've got a few slides that I want to share with you all, and it's important information, and it's important information about what we're calling a Division III analysis. So the President's Council has endorsed this comprehensive analysis of Division III. They really believe that this would be beneficial as the association and Division III continue to navigate the evolving landscape of higher education and intercollegiate athletics. The council endorsed a focused review of key issues, and this began in earnest with the 2026 convention just a couple months ago in 2 settings. One was the President's and Chancellor's Forum, and the other was the Division III Issues Forum. That's the large event where the entire division is together, the entire membership is together the day before our business session. And there were 2 key things came out of these events. We did a significant amount of data collection, and one of the questions that we wanted to have answered for us is around the student athlete experience in Division III. What is it? What does it mean? And we collected, again, there's an executive summary that's available at nca.org in the Division III section that'll give you all the details, but I just want to highlight a few of them that I think are really important. So in the unique qualities of the Division III experience, these are the items that absolutely hit the top of the list. One was student first athlete second. And that's coming from a cross-section of student athletes, campus leaders such as presidents, ADRs, and our athletics administrators as well across the board. Student first, athlete second. Division III student athletes play for the love of the game. That phrase was very, very common in the comments that we received. Along with that love of the game comes this holistic college experience. In terms of autonomy, flexibility, and personal development, that the way in which athletics is constructed on a Division III campus and the way that it's implemented allows student athletes to have that full holistic college experience. Another theme that we found throughout the comments was the fact that Division III athletics is a deep community with deep connections. It is truly meaningful and life-changing for these student athletes. But don't get me wrong, Division III athletes are competitive, and they are competitive, but that competition, that competitiveness is not all-consuming. It is the proper balance, as they noted. The other key thing, and I know you as ADRs are going to love to hear this, the other key theme was that they really viewed Division III athletics as preparation for life after college. This is the launching pad to a life beyond college when my athletic career is likely over but I have launched. And Division III athletics is clearly seen as preparation for life after college. So we take that as the backdrop. But we're doing this analysis not just to find out about that, we're also doing this analysis to identify the key tensions that are the tension points that exist within the division across our constituents. And I've got 4 that I want to highlight for you here. One of them, and these are not in any particular order, but one of them is access to national championships. Access to national championships. Now we know that a large majority of our institutions do participate in our championships in one way or the other. Actually, 80% of our institutions, whether it's a one team or even one individual, 80% regularly are engaged in our championships experience. But there are questions and there are tension points, most notably around the national or the NCAA Power Index. And this Power Index system, some that are very deep on the athletics front believe that this has potentially created some inequities as institutions are shifting the way in which they schedule their competition in order to increase their index score and give them more favorable rating when it comes to selection for championships. We've only had the NPI for a couple of years now, and as it grows, we hope that some of these issues will resolve themselves. But it's something we're paying very close attention to, and we want to dive deeper into that in this analysis. Another tension point that was identified was around eligibility. The specific catchphrases here are redshirting, 4 years of eligibility, and what some folks call inconsistencies that impact competitive equity and the student athlete experience. We just voted on a redshirting proposal. It was voted down. It did fail at on a 60-40 vote. That does mean that nearly half of our membership, 40% there, are interested in this model. And we want to stay ever present. We want to stay want to keep on top of that. And then the undergraduate model, our philosophy statement clearly says that it's a 4-year undergraduate experience. But there clearly are tensions there too, especially as we see the continuous litigation, primarily at the Division I level, of student athletes challenging that 4-year model, 4 years of competition in 5 years. That's number 2. The third one is around, and actually some of this fits in with what Eva and Sarah described, about playing and practice seasons are model in Division III that was recently changed just within the last few years to move to that days model away from a weeks model, providing increased access for student athletes to participate, especially in the non-traditional segments, and that impact of this new model on facilities, not just facilities, on support staff, athletic trainers, as well as athletic sports communicators, and just the overall balance between academics and athletics. This model was set up to provide flexibility for institutions, and some now believe that we might need some guardrails here. We might need some reining in order to bring better balance to the Division III student athlete experience. The fourth one is the governance process, and that's the way in which legislation and other policies are made at the national level. And there was a call for this process to be nimbler, more transparent. Clear oversight and communication is needed, and greater presidential involvement. It says clearly in our philosophy statement that the presidents and chancellors of our institutions are the ultimate authority in the division, and some believe that we need greater presidential involvement now, considering what is happening in higher education and intercollegiate athletics. Go to the next slide. What's the pathway forward? Now that we've identified this information, where do we go from here? So during a late January meeting, the President's Council endorsed the creation of a working group to review the convention feedback and oversee the research and collection of additional data, to gather governance structure and membership feedback, town halls, interviews and surveys, and propose next steps. Now, what they've done is this working group will oversee that work, but we have retained assistance from Deloitte, who helped us out a couple of years back with a great risk analysis study. And they're going to help us in the working group's efforts here to gather this feedback and propose what the next steps may be. The key piece here is in that third bullet: stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement. This is not good. These are not decisions and analyses that are going to be conducted just by a working group of 19 members that represent the division, but rather we're going to lean into the information from Deloitte, a true third party here, to arrive at a set of steps to move forward on. And what does that timeline look like? Next slide, please. So you can see here as you're looking down the dates, 1 and 2 we've done. So we're beyond steps 1 and 2. We're now into this step 3 and 4. And step 3 and 4 is the develop solutions and socialize with membership. Deloitte has yet to truly kick off their work. They're going to do that shortly here. And what we're going to do is over these coming months, as that information is collected and the stakeholder engagement ensues, we will be socializing things along the way with our membership in a very open and transparent way, and see where Deloitte comes out. Now, again, the President's Council, quote unquote, owns this project, and they will be the ones to guide the way once when we get into our summer meetings, and that's when Deloitte's work will be done. Deloitte's work will be done just over the next few months, and then the presidents will lead the way the rest of the way. And you can see here the continued development of solutions, continued socialization with the membership, and then potentially the implementation of ideas, concepts, and new policies at the earliest would be with convention in 2027. Sarah and Eva, that's what I have, and it looks like we have about 5 or 6 minutes left for any questions.
Right, and I think we have the Q&A open if there are any questions. And while I will just, Eric, I will ask a quick question while we may be waiting for some of those. I was recently reviewing the goals survey, the 2026 goals survey, and one of the things that really stood out to me was that our Division III student athletes are reporting since the last survey, which I think was 2019, that they're spending 1 hour more a week in athletic activity. So they're up to like 29 hours a week, and they're spending 3.5 hours less on academics than they were. I know it's hard to know whether that's a result of differences in opening up legislation around participation and non-traditional seasons, or whether it's a trend that we also see in all students. But I guess my question is, are there any things from the goals survey that have been particularly useful in guiding some of these conversations, or other data?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. The goals survey is something that I know our research friends are just so thrilled that folks are they would be thrilled to know that you've reviewed that report, Sarah. But it's some incredible information. Just keep in mind that what the goals survey is, first off, it's a representative sample of Division III student athletes. This is not a situation where every Division III student athlete is being polled on this. It's a representative sample, but our research folks are incredibly confident that this is generalizable. It is representative and generalizable. So Sarah, to your point, that is information we absolutely will engage as we move forward. That's incredibly helpful baseline information. Those questions will likely lead to follow-up questions within the town hall setting and with other surveying work that we may do around that. But the trend that you pointed out, it's a fascinating trend. And it's one that we also like to say in research, we like to put a little caveat on that and say, remember what the question is that's being asked. You're asking someone to recall how many hours they spent on a particular activity. What we also know, which is not always the most reliable, research reliable way of doing that, but it is a way to do it. The other thing, Sarah, that I would point out is whenever we've done this for years, you ask the student athletes, if you had 1 extra hour in the day and you can spend it doing anything but sleeping, what would it be? And student athletes almost always say their sport. So not surprising necessarily that we're seeing that number creep up, but that's very important information to make sure that is included as we move forward. I think there is something in the Q&A.
There was a question about navigation on the resources we talked about, Sarah. So, Bryn, I don't know if you can add a link in the chat for the compliance information on the website.
Yes, just like the compliance page.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yes, I can do that.
All right. We'll wait for Brent to do that so you can all gather that from the chat. I do want to thank you all. I know this is an incredibly busy time. It's hard to imagine that there's a time during the academic year that's not busy for everybody, but really appreciate you joining us at this time. I think there's so many great ways that we can share information and be resources for each other. So on that note, if there's anything I can do, I know Eva says the same way, please feel free to reach out to us as well. I think you as an ADR have an incredible impact and are so important in how to support our wonderful Division III model. It's the best model there is. Just say that. And we appreciate you taking the time to spend it with us this afternoon. So on that note, I know we don't necessarily have that link to the NCAA site, but Bryn, is that something that can be sent afterwards?
Yes, I just dropped 2 links in for our compliance page and then our main D3 membership page. I responded to
Great. I see them.
Wendy's comments, so they should be in there.
Excellent. Great.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Good luck with your week and the remainder of your semester.
Bye-bye.